back to Spiritwind. And as you may remember, Spiritwind is a class for spiritual adventurers. We like to investigate all things that have to do with spirituality. Even though some things might not seem like they have to do with spirituality, there's a tie-in, and you'll see. We meet every week at 5:30 at Unity of Auburn. So we invite you to join us. Come and help us discuss these topics. Everyone is always welcome. And so today we're going to review what we discussed in the month of April with our teacher and guru, Rick Reich.
Thank you.
So Rick, can you tell us what we examined in the month of April?
Well, we studied ethics, which is a branch of philosophy that's also called moral philosophy. And the word philosophy itself comes from two Greek words which actually mean the love of wisdom. And it is a discipline or study in which we attempt to answer the basic questions of human life. Philosophers, however, believe that ethics does not necessarily require a religious grounding. Rather, they try to use reason to determine what is good and bad and right and wrong and better and worse.
So then is there a difference between ethics and morals?
Yes, sometimes the two words are used interchangeably, but technically ethics are external rules which that are rules for society and professions, such as a doctor's code of ethics, while morals are more personal and individual, with examples like professional honesty, personal kindness, and so forth. So that's kind of the difference between the two.
Well, maybe you can give us just a little brief history of ethics.
Yes. Actually, the first ethical code, it's the oldest one that's ever been discovered up to date, is the Code of Ur-Nammu, king of Ur. And it was dated back to around 2050 before the Common Era. It's Sumerian, and it's the oldest code discovered to date. Before that was found Hammurabi's code, which was from Mesopotamia, and it contained 282 laws. This came around 1754 before the Common Era, and it actually had in it the law of retaliation. That is, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which also found its way into the Ten Commandments. The Ten Commandments would seem to be the moral platform or ethical platform for Jews and Christians, but it turns out it was never absolute. For instance, it says thou shalt not kill, but they killed plenty in war. They killed animals in sacrifices. They did capital punishment and all that. So, and you can actually, the Ten Commandments can be divided in two. The first commandments the first four commandments up to the Sabbath commandment have to do with our obligation to God. The other ones have to do with our obligation to human beings, like thou shalt not kill or steal or lie or adultery. And strangely enough, in Buddhism, what they call their 5 precepts say the same thing. Do not kill, do not steal, do not lie. Instead of adultery, they say do not practice sexual immorality, and they add do not take intoxicants.
They didn't say that in the Ten Commandments,
No,
though, did they?
No. When it comes to the main law, I think, for Christians is the golden rule. Do unto others as you'd have them do unto you, such as is said in the Sermon on the Mount, chapter 7, verse 12. Rabbi Hillel, who lived about 110 before the Common Era to 10 AD, and he had the negative form of the golden rule, which is that which is hateful to you, do not do to your fellow. And it's very interesting that you can look at all the world religions, and you will find that every religion has some form of the golden rule.
So we have the beginning of ethics, and obviously that has permeated throughout society for many, many years. But how about some of the more modern forms of ethics?
Well, also in that back older times, they had hedonism, which was the idea of hedonism was to maximize pleasure and to minimize pain. You had Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, which both taught their own form of ethics and so forth. But as far as modern thinkers on ethics, probably the first one was probably Benedict Spinoza, and his most famous work was called the Ethics. And he taught that happiness is the goal of conduct. It is the presence of pleasure and the absence of pain, but these are relative and not absolute. So he's similar to some of the older ones about the maximizing pleasure and minimizing pain. But the problem with Spinoza, I believe, is he believed in determinism. And determinism is the idea that humans don't have any freedom of choice, that everything they do has been predetermined by God. So, to me, how can you say someone did something wrong if God predetermined that they should do it? So it doesn't make any sense to me.
Yeah.
Then there was Immanuel Kant, who lived from 1724 to 1804. He was a German philosopher, and he taught what was known as the categorical imperative. And I'll read it as he said it, and then I'll tell you what it means. He said, "Act only according to that maxim whereby you can at the same time will that it should become an universal law."
Okay.
Now that's a
That's a
lot,
mouthful.
but all it really means is you should act in such a way that anything you do, anything you do would become a universal law. So if you commit adultery, you would be agreeing that it's okay for everybody to, or if you killed someone, it's okay for anyone to do that. So he thought that would be reprehensible, so no one would do it.
And it's almost like the golden rule.
It is.
Yes.
It's like a different form of the golden rule.
Right.
Then there were two guys, Jeremy Bentham and John Stuart Mill, who were both from Britain, and they were both political reformers as well as ethical reformers. For instance, Jeremy Bentham worked for the separation of church and state, equal rights for women, the right to divorce, and the decriminalization of homosexual acts, the abolition of slavery, abolition of the death penalty, and animal rights.
And this was in the 1800s.
Yes, so this is way back there.
Okay.
And but anyway, they taught, their philosophy was called utilitarianism, and what that meant was the greatest good for the greatest number of people. Now it sounds good, the greatest good for the greatest number of people, but what it meant was the majority always rules, because the greatest number of people
Right.
are always the majority,
Right.
which means that
The
minorities were out of luck.
Yeah.
So that's not good. Then next was William James, and he was an American philosopher, psychologist. He taught at Harvard philosophy, psychology, and medicine. He was one smart guy. And his brother was Henry James, the author, novelist, and so forth. And William James's version was called pragmatism. And this meant that every ethical situation should be based on the situation itself rather than ideas or theories. And the one that really took this and ran with it was a gentleman by the name of Joseph Fletcher. He wrote a book called Situation Ethics, The New Morality. And when that book came out, it raised all kinds of heck. Religious people were really up in arms over that book, that it did away with absolute moral laws and ethical laws, like the Ten Commandments, because it said everything should be based on the situation. And kind of one of the best example is, like, for instance, if you were a German during Nazi Germany in World War II, and say you were hiding Jews in your house somewhere, if you were going by Kant, which says you should always do something according to the way it should be universally, you'd tell the truth. He didn't believe in situations. Fletcher said every situation has to be looked at itself. And so, you wouldn't expect that if you were harboring Jews in your home to protect them, that if the Gestapo came to your house and asked you, do you have Jews in your home, you'd say, oh yeah, they're up in the attic or they're in the basement. He says, according to situation ethics, you would lie. And this is what bothered Christians so much.
But then again, you understand the circumstances.
You have to understand the circumstance.
Yeah.
And anyway, so he said that ethics cannot be determined by a universal moral code such as the Ten Commandments. Then there was Dietrich Bonhoeffer, who was born 1906, lived to 1945. He was a Lutheran pastor during Nazi Germany, and he was a dissident. And among his books he wrote The Ethics, and it was a book on the ethics, but it was never finished because what he had done is he had become so convinced that the only way the war would be won would be to assassinate Hitler. And he was involved with a group of people that attempted to do that. They had a bomb, and the bomb went off where he was supposed to be.
Where Hitler was supposed
to be, but it turned out he wasn't there. And so when the bomb went off, the people were arrested, and Bonhoeffer was arrested as well. And he was hung in 1945, just 2 weeks before the Allied forces came to liberate the concentration camp he was in. And I think they did it that way on purpose. Like he could just see
the tide was turning.
The tide was turning, and he was going to be free, and then they hang him. So, anyway, two last ones. One is the Dalai Lama.
Oh yeah, okay.
He wrote a book called Ethics for the New Millennium, and he begins with our basic goodness rather than the Christian idea of original sin. And because he teaches that compassion is the source of all lasting peace and happiness, he says that it's through kindness, honesty, truth, and justice towards others that we ensure what is best for ourselves as well as for everyone else in the world. And the last one, I thought I would give a chance to an atheist to see what their ethics would be. And this is Sam Harris. He was born in 1967, so he's definitely younger than me. Anyway, he received a BA in philosophy from Stanford, and he received a PhD in neuroscience from UCLA. And his doctoral dissertation at UCLA was called The Moral Landscape: How Science Can Determine Human Values. In his book, he tries to make a third path between those who say morality is subjective or situational, and those who say that it's based on religion, and so it's given by God in Scripture. And his third path is scientific method. And he concludes that there are facts about certain courses of action which will allow one to pursue a better life, and that science could determine which facts contribute to a better sense of well-being. I personally don't agree with him, not because he's not a believer or not because he's an atheist, but I just don't think that science can show us neurologically what is good and bad. If anything, it would just show us what we think is good and bad as individuals.
Yeah.
Because our neurology is different from someone else's.
I don't see how science can give us a moral code.
No.
Yeah, that would be a hard one to figure out. But these are the things that we discuss at Spiritwind. So thank you very much for telling us what we were doing in April. And now we'll go on to what is going to be happening in May, because it kind of ties in to what we've been discussing about morality and ethics. So what is our topic for May?
In May, it sounds like it's a big one and a hard one, but it's called The Ultimate Nature of Reality.
Well, how are we going to focus on this?
Well, when I say the ultimate nature of reality, I'm not going to be talking about what we take as everyday reality, nor are we looking at what science is saying about ultimate reality, such as atoms, subatomic particles, and all that kind of stuff. We're going to look what philosophers has theorized what reality is made of for the last 2,500 years. And obviously, if you go back 2,500 years, they weren't talking about quarks and atoms and all those things, you know. So,
can you give us a little brief synopsis then of what these ancient theorists came up with?
Yeah. First, there were what they called the pre-Socratics, which means the philosophers that lived before Socrates. And this is talking about some 2,700 years ago in Greek-speaking colonies on the coast of what is now Turkey. And they emerged with a new way of thinking. They were disenchanted with the answer that came from the gods. They up to that point, the gods said what everything was. And there was magic involved and all kinds of stuff. But anyway, Thales of Miletus, who lived from 642 to 547 before the Common Era, he was an astronomer, a mathematician, and a philosopher. And he said that everything in the universe is made of water. Now, to us today, that would seem silly. But what he was observing was that water can be liquid, it can be frozen and then it's a solid, it can be boiled and then it becomes a gas. So water seems to be everything that everything in reality is. Everything is a solid, a liquid, or a gas. So because of that, he conceived that everything is actually made of water. And in a way, our bodies are mostly water, the earth is mostly water and all that.
And we need water for life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
anyway, and then he had a student named Anaximander who flourished around 550 before the Common Era. And he thought the original was what he called the limitless, the infinite or limitless. And from it was a source that brought perpetual birth to whatever was. So that was very abstract because you don't know what is the infinite, I mean, you could say God is the infinite and everything comes from God, but he didn't say that, but that's what it seems. Anaximenes, who also lived about the same time, believed that everything consisted of air. Air condenses into rain, he believed, and when it cools down, it becomes earth, and when it heats up, it becomes fire.
Oh, okay.
So again, he tries to have one thing that makes up for the different elements of the earth. Then there was Pythagoras, and he believed that the whole cosmos could be understood as numbers. He's the one that came up with the Pythagorean theorem, so it's very interesting today that everything can be conceived with numbers on computers. Everything.
Yeah.
And here he was 500 years before the Common Era, and he was already theorizing that the cosmos could be understood as numbers. Then there was Heraclitus of Ephesus, and he thought that everything consisted of fire, which he showed was ever-changing. Fire is continually changing. It's not one form. And because of that, he's the one that made the famous statement that's still said to this day, you can never step in the same river twice, because it's always changing. And then finally there was Leucippus and Democritus, or Democritus. They lived in the 400s before the Common Era, and they were the first what were called atomists. And atomists believed that everything in reality was made up of atoms. Now, they didn't think of atoms the way we do, which are really just points of energy. They thought they were like little balls. They were little tiny balls, and that everything was made up of those. There were also what they called pluralists, and the pluralists, probably the most famous one of the pluralists was Empedocles, and he was the one that taught everything was composed of earth, air, fire, and water.
He just put all those guys together then.
Yeah, earth, air, fire, and water. And so everything on Earth and in the universe was made of some mixture of those four things. And the strange thing was, this view was the longest held view ever in history, because it began back there 400 some years before the Common Era, and it was still believed in the 17th century, of our time. Anyway, so when we get into the real modern people, we have Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and he said that everything was made up of what he made up his own word, monads. And monads were what he called the elementary particles that the universe is made up of. And their properties, they're eternal, indecomposable, individual, subject to their own laws. So they're unlike atoms, however, I mean modern day atoms, monads possess no material or spatial character. And then Bishop Berkeley, who lived 1685 to 1773, was a philosopher, and he said that everything came from divine mind.
And so that sounds like a Charles Fillmore thing also.
Yeah, Charles Fillmore, the founder of Unity, also believed that. I'll just mention two others. Alfred Knight North Whitehead, who taught at the University of London and Harvard University, has a whole metaphysics laid out in his book Process and Reality. And then Ken Wilber, the one contemporary, he was born in 1949. He wrote A Brief History of Everything, and he has a whole idea based on what he calls holons, which a holon is something that is a whole and a part. Like a atom is a whole, but it's a part of a molecule. And a molecule is a whole, but it's a part of a cell, and so forth. So, then at the end of the class, we'll go into some nuclear physics of just a touch on what's going on today.
Okay, so that's reality in a very physical sense.
Yes, yes.
That we're discussing. Because we know that it's really hard to figure out what reality is on the internet.
Right, exactly.
So we won't even go there. We'll stay with the physical then.
Right.
Okay. So there you have it. Those are the kind of things that we discuss at Unity of Auburn on Wednesday nights at 5:30. And Unity is at 1212 High Street. So we invite you to come and join us. Bring your friends, bring any books you might have that counteract some of these philosophies. It's really interesting discussion, and everyone is welcome. And so thank you again, Rick, and I'm Pam Hart. We hope to see you next time.
Thank you.